My name is Ethan Cole, I'm 25 years old, and I live just outside Billings, Montana, the kind of place where winters bite hard and memories never fade. And if you ask me what night changed my family forever, I'd tell you it was the one when my father betrayed the man who built everything we had. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. My grandfather, Harold Cole, was a rancher through and through, a man with hands like leather and eyes that had seen more sunrises than most folks see in a lifetime. He'd spent 50 years running our family's cattle ranch, one of the biggest in Montana's northern plains. That ranch wasn't just land, it was his life. But when he turned 74, he made a decision none of us saw coming. He sold it. Every acre. Every head of cattle. And when the deal closed, $3.8 million in total, he handed every single penny to my father, Robert Cole. Not a trust. Not a split. Not even a savings fund. Just a check and a promise. Son, he said, his voice soft but steady, I'm giving this to you. I don't need much. Just take care of me. That was it. The whole deal, money for love, wealth for loyalty. My dad smiled, shook his hand, and said, "Of course, Dad. You'll never have to worry again." My mom, Linda, smiled too, because she always believed him. She believed every promise my father made, no matter how many times he broke them. I tried to believe too. I wanted to think my dad was the kind of man who'd honor that promise. But something in his eyes that day, it didn't sit right. I'd seen that look before, the same look he got when he was counting money or talking about investments. A look that saw opportunity, not responsibility. For a while, things seemed fine. Dad bought a new house, a big one, with high ceilings and a view of the mountains. He bought Mom a new SUV and himself a brand new Silverado. Grandpa moved into the guest room. At first, it looked like everything was working out. But slowly, I started seeing cracks, the kind that start small but split a family apart. It began with small sighs when Grandpa asked for help, quiet eye rolls when he needed something from the shelf. Then came the comments. "You're not helpless," Dad would mutter. "You can do things yourself." He said it like a joke, but there was poison under the words. Grandpa would smile weakly, trying not to let it show. But I saw the pain in his eyes. And then came the night that burned itself into my memory forever. It was January. Snow piled against the doors, the heater struggled, and the wind screamed like a living thing outside. I woke up to shouting, my father's voice echoing through the hall. "I'm done, old man," he yelled. "You've been nothing but a burden since the day you moved in." Grandpa's voice, soft but steady, answered, "I gave you everything, Robert. All I asked was kindness." "That was your mistake," my father snapped. And then, I heard the sound of the door slamming open. Cold wind roared through the house. By the time I ran downstairs, my grandfather was standing on the back porch, clutching his coat, shivering under the porch light. My father stood inside, blocking the doorway. "You can find somewhere else to go," he said. His voice was like ice. Then he shut the door. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching through the glass, my grandfather's breath turning white in the freezing air. Then he turned and met my eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That was the moment I made my choice. I grabbed my coat, opened the door, and stepped into the cold. "You're coming with me," I said. He tried to protest. "Ethan, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," I said. "You took care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn." He nodded, silent tears freezing on his cheeks. Behind us, the light inside flickered. I could see my father's shadow moving across the curtain. But I didn't care. That night, I chose love over blood. And I knew it would change everything. The drive that night felt endless. The snow hit the windshield like 1,000 tiny shards of glass, and the headlights struggled to cut through the storm. Grandpa sat beside me, wrapped in his old wool coat, the same one he'd worn every winter for as long as I could remember. His hands trembled in his lap, and every now and then, I'd glance over and see his breath fogging up the window. Neither of us spoke for miles. The silence was heavy, not awkward, just heavy. The kind that comes when two people are holding back everything they don't want to say. Finally, his voice broke through the hum of the heater. "Ethan," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this, son. I'll find a place." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "You're staying with me, Grandpa. No more arguing." He turned his head toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "I never thought I'd see the day my own son would turn me out like that," he whispered. "Maybe I was a fool for trusting him." I shook my head. "You weren't a fool. You were a father. You believed in him. That's what good men do." He looked at me then, eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. "You're a good boy, Ethan," he said softly. "Better than your old man ever was." When we reached my apartment, a tiny place above a hardware store on the edge of town, the heater barely worked, and the floorboards creaked like they were older than both of us combined. But it was warm, and it was ours. I gave him my bed that night and took the couch. He tried to argue, but I smiled and said, "You raised me to be a man, remember? This is what a man does." That earned me a faint grin, one of the last genuine ones I'd see for a while. The weeks that followed weren't easy. I picked up an extra shift at the gas station down the road, stocking shelves during the day and pumping fuel at night. Every dollar mattered. Groceries were simple: beans, bread, eggs when we could afford them. But Grandpa never complained. In fact, he often apologized. "I feel like I'm holding you back, son," he said one evening as I set down 2 bowls of soup on the kitchen table. "You're not holding me back," I told him. "You're giving me a reason to push harder." He smiled faintly, that same warm smile he used to give me when I was a kid riding in the bed of his pickup down those dirt roads at the ranch. One night, as I came home from my second job, I found him sitting by the window, staring out at the snow-covered streetlights. He didn't notice me right away. He was humming the same tune he used to whistle on the ranch. When he turned, he smiled. "I was just thinking about the old days," he said. "The ranch, the smell of the hay, the sound of cattle in the mornings. Hard times, sure, but honest ones. The kind that made you proud to wake up." I sat beside him. "You ever miss it?" "Every day," he said, eyes distant. "But I miss the people more than the place. Your grandma. The ranch hands. The long evenings when the whole family sat together, not thinking about money, just about each other." He looked at me again. "Don't ever let money turn you into something cold, Ethan. Once you stop valuing people, nothing else you build matters." Those words stuck to me like scripture. As winter faded into spring, Grandpa's health began to slip. Some mornings, his hands shook so much he couldn't button his shirt. Other days, he'd try to stand and have to sit right back down. But no matter how weak he got, he never once asked to go back. I made sure of that. I'd come home from work exhausted, but the moment I saw him sitting there, smiling, waiting with a cup of coffee for me, the tiredness faded. We'd spend our evenings talking about everything. He'd tell me stories about his youth, how he and his brothers once rode horses across the frozen creek just to prove they could. Sometimes, he'd talk about my father, back when Dad was still young and kind. "Your father wasn't always like this," Grandpa would say. "When he was your age, he wanted to build something honest. Somewhere along the way, he started chasing comfort instead of purpose." I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't hate my father, not yet. I just pitied him. Because for all his money and pride, he'd lost the one thing that made life worth living: love. One afternoon, I came home early to find Grandpa sketching something on a notepad. It looked like the outline of our old ranch. "What's that?" I asked. "Just memory work," he said with a grin. "Trying to keep my mind sharp." He flipped the page and revealed a sentence written in shaky handwriting. "A man's worth isn't in his land. It's in how he treats his family." I stared at it for a long time. He looked at me knowingly. "That's what I want you to remember, Ethan. When I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," I said, my throat tight. He just smiled. "Son, when you've lived as long as I have, you stop fearing endings. You start hoping you've left something worth carrying forward." Weeks later, I came home to silence. No humming. No stories. No sound of slippers on the floor. I called out his name, no answer. When I opened the bedroom door, he was lying peacefully in bed, his hands folded, his expression calm. He was gone. For a long time, I sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering thank yous through tears that wouldn't stop coming. He'd left this world the same way he'd lived, quietly, with dignity, after teaching one last lesson. I thought that was the end of our story. But when the lawyer called 2 weeks later about Grandpa's will, I realized his story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The morning of the will reading was cold and gray, the kind of day that felt too quiet, like the world knew something heavy was about to happen. Mom and I drove in silence to the attorney's office in downtown Billings. She gripped her purse like it was holding her together, her knuckles white against the leather. Dad met us there, already waiting in the parking lot beside his truck, bought with Grandpa's money. He stood there with that same air of self-importance he always carried, like he was walking into a meeting he'd already won. He nodded stiffly at me, eyes hard. "Let's get this over with." Inside, the lawyer's office was warm, but the air was thick with tension. Books lined the walls, and the smell of old paper mixed with the faint scent of coffee. I sat across from my father at a long oak table, my mother between us, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The lawyer, a calm man named Mr. Dalton, cleared his throat as he unfolded a stack of papers. "We're here to settle the estate of Mr. Harold Cole," he began. His voice was steady, professional, but gentle. "Your father left very clear instructions." Dad leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. I'm sure he did, he said. Mr. Dalton adjusted his glasses. Mr. Cole sold his ranch property before his death and transferred the proceeds, totaling $3.8 million, to his son, Robert Cole, under the condition that Robert would provide care, housing, and dignity for his father for the remainder of his life. Dad smiled smugly, glancing at me like he'd already won the jackpot twice. That's what I've been saying all along, he muttered. But Mr. Dalton didn't stop reading. However, he continued, his tone sharpening slightly, your father also added a contingency clause, one that applies if these conditions were not met. The room went still. Dad frowned. What kind of clause? Mr. Dalton looked up. It states that if, at the time of his death, Mr. Harold Cole was not under the care of his son but instead under the care of another family member, then all assets, including the estate funds, are to be immediately and entirely transferred to that caretaker. For a moment, no one moved. Mom's breath caught in her throat. The color drained from Dad's face. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat again, turning a page. Mr. Cole's records and testimony confirmed that during the final months of his life, he resided with and was cared for by his grandson, Ethan Cole. He looked up, his expression softening as he said the next words. Therefore, by the terms of this will, the entire estate, including the remaining funds and assets, is hereby transferred to Ethan Cole. Silence. Not just quiet, stunned, soul-splitting silence. Dad's jaw worked, but no words came out. His face flushed red, then pale, then red again. This, he stammered. This is insane. That money was mine. He gave it to me. Mr. Dalton didn't even flinch. He did. And he also made it conditional. I have his exact words written here, a fortune is wasted in selfish hands. Let it belong to the one who shows me love when I have nothing left. The quote hung in the air like a thunderclap. Mom gasped, her hand covering her mouth. I felt everything at once, shock, sadness, disbelief, but above all, I felt the weight of Grandpa's faith in me. Dad slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. You can't do this. I'll fight it in court. Mr. Dalton calmly closed the folder. You're free to try. But your father had this will notarized and witnessed in accordance with state law. It's airtight. I'd never seen my father look small before. But sitting there, red-faced and shaking, he looked like a man who had just realized the truth, that all the money in the world couldn't buy back integrity once it's lost. Mom turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. He trusted you, she said softly. He gave you everything, and you threw him away. Dad didn't respond. He just stood up, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out of the room without a word. The door slammed behind him. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then Mom reached over and took my hand. He was right about you, she whispered. You have his heart. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. Mr. Dalton slid a folder across the table, the official documents transferring the estate into my name. Your grandfather wanted you to have this, Ethan, he said. Not for wealth, but for what it represents. I nodded slowly, my hands trembling as I took the folder. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of the paper inside, but because of what it meant. I walked out of that office into the cool Montana air, the wind cutting through my jacket, my mind spinning. I wasn't happy. I wasn't proud. I was humbled. My grandfather had trusted me, not for my strength or my ambition, but for something far simpler. For love. That night, I went home and sat alone in the dark, the papers spread out on my kitchen table. $3.8 million. A lifetime of work. A man's entire legacy. And somehow, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like responsibility. I whispered into the quiet, I hope I make you proud, Grandpa. Somewhere, deep down, I felt like he heard me. For weeks after the will reading, my father refused to speak to me. Not a word. No texts. No calls. Just silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of anger. Mom, on the other hand, checked in almost every day. She'd show up with a casserole or a grocery bag, pretending she just happened to be nearby, but I could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that comes from living between two people at war. Dad had always been the louder one, the one whose presence filled the room, but now that silence, his absence, carried a different weight. It was heavy. It was shame. When he finally did show up at my apartment one evening, he didn't knock. He just walked in, his boots thudding across the floor. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice rough from whiskey and pride. So, he said, looking around at my small place. This is what you traded your family for? A pile of paperwork and some pity money? I set down my coffee slowly. I didn't trade anything, Dad. Grandpa made his choice. You made yours. He laughed bitterly. Don't start acting like a saint. You think this makes you better than me? You think he loved you more? I stood up, trying to keep my voice calm. It's not about love or money. It's about how you treated him. You promised to take care of him, and instead, you. Don't you dare lecture me, he snapped, pointing a finger in my face. You have no idea what it's like to carry a family's weight. He didn't give me that money out of love, he gave it to control me. I was done being his servant. I took a step back. You could have chosen compassion. But you chose greed. He stared at me for a long moment, jaw tight. You'll regret this, Ethan, he said finally. He used you to punish me. That's all this is. And just like that, he was gone again, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the folder still there. The one that held my grandfather's will, his final wishes, his last act of faith. I could still hear his voice. A man's worth isn't in his land, Ethan. It's in how he treats his family. Those words meant more now than ever. Because I didn't feel rich, not even close. What I felt was responsible. For his legacy. For his memory. For proving that his trust hadn't been misplaced. A week later, Mom came by, her eyes swollen and tired. He's not doing well, she said quietly. Your father's angry, but underneath it, he's broken. I nodded. I figured. She looked at me across the table, her voice trembling. You know, when your grandfather gave him that money, I thought it would bring our family closer. I thought it meant security. I didn't realize it would tear us apart. I sighed. Money doesn't destroy people, Mom. It just shows who they really are. Her eyes softened. You sound just like him, she said, a small smile breaking through. Your grandfather would be proud. That meant more to me than anything else she could have said. After that conversation, I made a decision. If Grandpa had trusted me to carry his legacy, then I was going to do more than just hold on to it. I was going to honor it. The first step was to buy back a part of the ranch land. Not all of it, just a few hundred acres. Enough to bring back the memory of what once was. The old barn still stood there, half collapsed, the paint stripped by decades of wind and time. I spent weeks repairing it, board by board, beam by beam. Every nail I drove in felt like stitching a wound shut, not just the ranch's, but mine too. When the work was finally done, I hung a small brass plaque by the entrance. It read, "In memory of Harold Cole, a man whose hands built what hearts remember." The first time Mom saw it, she cried. She stood there in the doorway, fingertips tracing the letters, whispering, he'd love this. But I didn't stop there. Grandpa always believed in the next generation, in giving young people a chance to do better. So I used part of the inheritance to start the Harold Cole Scholarship Fund, for kids from rural families who couldn't afford college. The first year, we helped 3 students, one studying veterinary science, another agricultural business, and one who wanted to become a mechanic. Every acceptance letter they sent me felt like proof that Grandpa's spirit was still alive. And for the first time since the will reading, I started to feel peace. As for my father? He never came around. He heard about the scholarship, about the land, about everything I was doing, and instead of pride, it only made him angrier. He called once, just once. You think building barns and handing out checks makes you righteous, he said. All you did was take what was mine. I took a deep breath. No, Dad. I didn't take anything. You gave it away the moment you chose pride over love. He didn't reply. The line went silent, then clicked dead. That was the last time we spoke. Still, Mom visited the ranch often. We'd sit on the porch with cups of coffee, the wind carrying the smell of grass and soil, and she'd tell me stories about how Grandpa used to hum while fixing fences, how he'd whistle to call the horses in. He always believed love could outlast anything, she said one evening, her gaze lost in the distance. Even greed. And I realized then, she was right. Grandpa's legacy wasn't in the money, or the acres, or the cattle. It was in the values he left behind, the invisible inheritance written in how we choose to live, not what we own. That night, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, I stood outside the restored barn. The plaque glowed faintly in the light. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered. I kept my promise, Grandpa. 3 years have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. 3 years since the silence that broke my family, and somehow, began to heal me. The ranch I bought back isn't big. It doesn't have the same endless horizon that Grandpa's once had. But it has something that means more than land ever could, it has memory. Every fence post, every board of the barn, every breath of Wyoming wind carries a piece of him. The scholarship fund has grown, too. What started with 3 kids now supports over 40. They write to me every semester, kids from small towns, broken homes, and dirt roads, kids who remind me of the boy I used to be, staring out at open fields wondering if he mattered. Each letter begins the same way, Dear Mr. Cole, thank you for believing in me. Every time I read those words, I hear Grandpa's voice again. A man's worth isn't in his land, Ethan. It's in how he treats his family. It turns out, he didn't just mean blood family. He meant people. The ones you care for, the ones you lift up, the ones who remind you what love looks like when the world forgets. Mom still visits on Sundays. We sit on the porch with coffee and pie, the way she and Grandpa used to. The fields roll out before us, green in spring, golden in fall. Sometimes she hums an old tune he loved, and we just sit in peace. She's aged since all this began. The lines on her face tell a story of love and loss, but her smile, her real smile, is back now. Your grandfather would have loved what you've done, she tells me often. He'd be proud you turned pain into purpose. That word, purpose, it echoes in my mind every day. Because that's what Grandpa left me. Not a fortune, not land, but purpose. And I've built my life around it. A few months ago, I got a call I wasn't expecting. It was from my father. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, that stubborn part that still wanted closure, told me to pick up. His voice was rough, tired, and older. Ethan, he said quietly, I'm sick. The doctors say it's my heart. I stayed silent for a moment. He waited, maybe hoping for sympathy, maybe expecting anger. Do you need help? I finally asked. He hesitated. I don't deserve it. No, I said softly. You don't. But Grandpa would have told me to do it anyway. That silence again. Then a quiet laugh, small, broken, but real. He always did know how to raise better men than me, he murmured. I didn't reply, but I arranged for him to get treatment in Billings. Paid the bills. Checked in occasionally. We never had a big reconciliation moment, no teary apologies, no movie ending. But one afternoon, as I helped him out of his chair, he grabbed my arm and said, you took care of him when I didn't. And now, you're taking care of me too. That was all I needed. Sometimes peace doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in quiet ones, in forgiveness that isn't spoken but lived. Now, whenever I walk through the barn, I see it not as a monument, but as a story, one that began long before me and will continue long after I'm gone. The scholarship kids visit sometimes, to thank me in person. They take photos under the plaque, run their fingers over Grandpa's name. One of them, a girl named Jenna from Casper, asked me once, what made you do all this? I smiled and told her the truth. Because someone once believed in me when no one else did. And I promised I'd spend the rest of my life passing that forward. Last winter, during the first heavy snow, I sat alone on the porch. The wind howled across the open field, cold and sharp, just like that night years ago when Dad had thrown Grandpa out into the dark. But this time, I wasn't angry. I closed my eyes and whispered, you're home now, Grandpa. You'll always be home. A gust of wind passed through the grass, rattling the fence line. And for a second, just a second, I swore I could hear his voice again. Good job, Ethan. You finally learned it. Love always outlives greed. I've learned that money fades, land changes hands, names get forgotten, but love? Love leaves fingerprints that time can't erase. My father's greed built walls. My grandfather's love built bridges. And those bridges are still standing. So if there's one thing this story has taught me, one thing I hope anyone listening remembers, it's this. Family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up when the world turns cold. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't what's written in a will, it's what's written in the heart. Would you have done the same if it were your family? Tell me in the comments, I read every one of them. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of family, betrayal, and quiet redemption. Because sometimes, the richest people are the ones who choose love over money.